about it for probably hours, but I forgot to address something also very important, and I just remembered. And that is synthetic identities, because all this that we spoke about was about identities and identity theft or digital identities. And synthetic identities that we slightly touched on is a completely different topic, because unlike
Mm-hmm.
the problems that we just touched on now, where the whole regulation, for example, or fraud defense systems, they are based on the presumption that individual who is the victim of fraud is going to report that they're a victim of the fraud, right? But what
Yeah,
happens if there
exactly.
is no
Yeah.
victim and there is fraud? There is a synthetic identity, so there is nobody behind. It's a Frankenstein identity. So basically, let me just walk you through what that means and why this complex topic is also really important. And we spoke about it in a little bit detail previously, and I tried to explain this in really simple language so I can summarize it really well. But what it means is that
Mm-hmm.
the growing trend where you would have certain fraudster, for example, whether if it's individual or the network, doesn't matter, to build identity combining the real and fake information. This is why we call them, they have a blend of both. We call them Frankenstein identities because they are assembled from various pieces of identity information.
Real existing
Yes,
people's existing information, but for example, name from this person, so
yes.
date of birth from
Or
another
variation.
person, stuff like
Even
that.
it can be a variation of that,
Uh-huh.
or misplace certain character or another piece of information. So unlike the regular identity theft, where fraudsters here play for the long game, basically building the credit over the months or years even before they're busting out. So this problem, in the study that we have done, we have identified that there was nearly 3 million suspicious identities in the UK. So increased dramatically that increased dramatically from 2020 to 2023. It was more than 500%, 527% increase in highly probable synthetic identities. So that could mean that a certain synthetic identity, sorry, that was built to build a credit score doesn't have to be used straight away. It can be
Mm-hmm.
used later. But with that fake identity that was created and looking good credit score, they can pose significant damage to the companies or to loan providers or anybody who is to allow them certain service. So because they're manipulating the existing identities and manufacturing completely new synthetic identities, we don't even know that they're there. We have no idea. So there are certain warning signs in that story. So, for example, they would have lack of life story, if you like, or normal life cycle progression, no government records or passports or driving license, no family connections or associates, or multiple variations of the same
Mm-hmm.
details would be connected to them. And what is really important is when you look at them and we try to connect. So through the analytical approach, you would then link certain data sets and you would find synthetic farms. So sometimes those would be addresses where there is a building, let's say, I'm just giving an example, if there is 7 flats in the building and you have 500 people living there,
Mm-hmm.
it's obviously not possible that you would have 500 people living there. So somebody's really using this address rather for the records than it's really for the living situation. So that growing trend is really dangerous for the companies that are relying on the information that they have, because many of them that they might not even know that they're created are already there. So who is to report this? Because nobody's reporting. There is no regulation currently in place that would ask them to have to report back every single case so the rest of the network would know. You wouldn't be able to recognize it real time, which can pose damage to a lot more companies than it's currently doing.
One question, Katarina, because when I was working in FICOM years ago, I remember that there was always with KYC, AML and embargo, EMB. And it is super interesting because at the end is what you're telling, the taxation, for example, that it was happening in every bank. It was through this company, and then it was checking who was the source, who is the destination, and it was checking all the databases of the FBI, CIA, European Union, Interpol, checking who was this person, And always it was the same problem because it's something that is coming now, for example, with this digital euro. The idea of control everything. Because for sure that there are bad guys, because always there are bad guys, always there were bad
Mm-hmm.
guys, there will be always bad guys. But for sure now that there is, because of a number of laws and a number of regulations to try to control. And I'm talking about AML, I'm talking about the EMB and KYC, because at the end, the power of these big companies that they have about the people is crazy because they know everything and they are able to block a person if they want. So because if they're telling to you you cannot make a bank transfer because you are this person, you are out of the system. So what I mean is that the same that is going to happen because will happen because the government wants to do that with the digital euro, digital dollar, and all this kind of money, they are going to be able to control everything. So in one side is the power of the bad guys that they know who you are, they make new identities, and in the other side is the power of the powerful people, the companies and the governments. So, and in the middle is the people. The normal humans, we are in the middle. We are not the organization who track everything, and we are able to tell you, you
Totally.
cannot spend more money. This
If
is my money, but you cannot do that.
if
How is that
somebody if
working for you?
somebody today gets into your account and steal your money from your bank, would you expect bank to pay you back?
It depends of the
Where
country
you
and
are,
depends of the regulation
but
because there is.
personally as an individual,
And,
would you
And
expect?
not,
But what I mean is that it's not for me that I'm living where I live in. It depends where you live. And what I mean with that is depends if you put all the money in the same pocket and depends of many, many things. What I mean is that for sure that there is a reason for many things, but there is an abuse
Mhm.
of the reason for many other things. And for example, the regulation in many countries that they allow people to don't pay with paper. If I want to pay with cash, there are many places where it's not allowed.
Mhm.
So these kind of things that are making the people in the middle
Mhm.
something like wow. you know
I
I
want I want to answer your question about if I expect bank to pay me. I would say yes, but this depends on the reason, what happened. Because if it's my fault, probably not. But if it's bank's fault, absolutely
Yeah.
yes. Because there are so many layers that should prevent this from happening. Uh,
Mhm.
Insurance included. So all my investment, all my bank account, they should be covered by insurance. And should be
Mhm.
some kind of protection from this fact. But I trust
Yeah.
my bank specifically to save my money. And this, if they failed saving my money, I expect
Yeah.
them to
I
pay me
think
back.
that is an average response you would probably get from people who trust their banks or
Yeah.
different other companies that handle their finances or personal data. They expect them to protect them, right? And that no malicious activity would happen. And I'll try to cover this fairly and offer slightly different perspective. Before I was in this space, I used to have a very similar view on this, as I think the majority does. And this is why I think building awareness is really crucial, because people get scared if they hear,
Hmm.
oh, if we have an app that is using behavioral biometrics, any sort of my personal data to create any sort of indicator of the risk, or if it's to use it for any kind of tracking purposes, you feel controlled, you feel exposed, you don't feel safe. Well, what I'm seeing genuinely in here and being in the industry, I'm quite the opposite. When I go to websites, I accept the cookies because I know what those cookies are used
Hmm.
for and I know how this can actually protect me. So there is regulatory wise and ethically, I would say, the different reasons to collect the data. There is one scenario which I don't want to discuss, when people collect your data so they can get to know you better, so they can offer you services or more personalized adverts. Those kind of things I'm not really interested in, and I have completely
Hmm.
different view on that. What I will focus on is the data that somebody is collecting on us, so they will understand what my typical behavior is. So if something unusual were to happen on my account, would be immediately blocked. And this is a real situation that happens in my bank. I was called one Monday morning saying that certain amount of money in a transaction has been blocked before they speak to me. It was fraud department from a bank saying there were two transactions, big transactions coming from your account. One was gambling in Texas, and a couple of hours later, another one was in casino in China. Now, a good fraud detection system had to use my real location. They had to use my patterns, how I interact with my device. What they did is not somebody holding a file to say, Katarina usually sleeps at 2 a.m. It's to say, following the
Hmm.
patterns of your transactions, we have never seen you doing transactions in gambling and gaming sector at 2 a.m. This is not typical behavior for this account. The amount that you put into that transaction is not really usual pattern. And most of all, it's impossible to be in China and Texas in a couple of hours apart. So I was really pleased to learn that my
Hmm.
bank was using all of that. And I was pleased that I allowed him to track my real location. Otherwise, this transaction would go through. This is one part. Data being collected for prevention of economic crime, for my own security, for the national security, if we talk about the terrorism, for me is a completely different thing. But I think it's more important to educate people what kind of data is actually collected, what do they know about you and how they're using that, because otherwise people might think that somebody's playing a big brother in this game and just trying to find out everything about you, which is not the case. You would have analytical tools that basically want to observe what good looks like, so they would be able to identify bad.